Noel, I'm your host, and I'm joined by the amazing Margaret Ward-Martin this evening, who I will introduce to you. I think James has finally turned the microphone off, so you won't hear him typing away. James is our techie guy, somewhere in the background there. I'm just making him grimace. He'll be sort of blood red at the moment and sort of hanging his head in shame, as you should, James, quite rightly so. Anyway, it's a live show. Great to have you with us. Do join in. We're streaming on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and on Periscope via Twitter. You can also give us a call. The number's 07. What's my number? 07586 319 745. That's +44 7586 319 745. I totally had a blank on my own number. I've been saying that for so many years. But there you go. So it'd be lovely to hear from you. Enough of that. Let me introduce you to Margaret. Hello, Margaret. How are you doing?
Very well. Evening, Noel. Thank you for the kind words. Very kind words. Thank you.
Good to have you with us. I've known you for a while, so there's some authority behind that statement. Good to have you on. I didn't sort of introduce you formally. Margaret's a psychotherapist, a colleague that we've worked together quite a bit. And so I've known you, and I've been interested for quite some time in your current project as well, which is around looking at recovery from narcissistic abuse and relationships. And in many ways, I don't think we need the word abuse. Just put narcissistic relationships. That's enough. The abuse is sort of a word, a descriptor that isn't really needed. They are abusive, difficult relationships. So we're going to be chatting about that a bit later on. But I like to catch up with people sort of and just get a sense of how things have been. I'm just about to... there we go.
Bless you.
How has it been the last 19 months now, isn't it? Since
yes, an experience. I think we talked. Thankfully, we had a quick chat this morning, so I had a think about the last year and a half, and for me, it's been transformative. It was an interesting timing because I was coming out of a 30-year relationship. I had lost my father the previous summer. I just retired from teaching, and I was wondering what was next for me. And then the world shut down. So the blessing in that, because I was feeling...
Sorry, Margaret, that's just a brilliant description of and then World War III happened, and then aliens invaded and the moon exploded.
No, that's right. Well, I like hyperbole. But so what happened was I had this opportunity to have a think about what I wanted to do. But the great gift for me, or there were a couple of great gifts. The first one was because I was feeling like I was feeling, it was a bit self-piteous and indulgent. So I had no FOMO. There was no fear of missing out because there was nothing to miss out on. And that was really quite helpful for me. And then for a period, my youngest son came home. And that was lovely because that was an unexpected gift. Of course, he didn't enjoy that, and he felt shortchanged of his university experience. So I think that was a real insight into how different people were affected. I think I enjoyed the sense of communal responsibility, though. I mean, I remember this clapping on the doorstep and how we'd just encourage our NHS colleagues. Yeah, and I thought that was lovely, a real shift in spirit, and so that I enjoyed. And then I had the space to think about what next for me. So at the time I was working with ex-offenders with addiction issues. So I've not stopped working throughout, but I was working online for a while. And then I set up my own practice and did my deep dive into the Grace Project and learning more. So, yes.
Extraordinary set of circumstances, though, in your life. And it could easily have... you could have easily dived into a big hole of self-pity, and justifiably so in many ways. It's sort of, it is, your father dies, your relationship ends, you're on your own, you do all the divorce stuff, and then the world shuts down. That could have sent you. Why didn't it send you, do you think, into? I mean, I'm sure it did for a bit, but why did you come out of that? What was it you think that turned it around for you?
That's a really insightful question. I think it's because I was ahead of the curve because of what we do. So I was in supervision, I was in therapy, I had training, I had enough under my belt in terms of trauma training and personal processes to think, well, I've survived that much. What can I do with this? And for some reason, I was able to access, my learning to that point. And also working was great. I didn't stop working, well, not much, because there was, if you remember, there were weeks on end where people weren't functioning as normal, whatever normal is. But that really helped.
Yeah, I sort of normal. I mean, it's a complicated word. We can sort of problematize it or not. I'm happy to use it, but I also think sort of people are functional or not functional. Sort of certainly, I think in our field we get to understand that people have adaptations which help or don't.
Yeah,
really is what it comes down to from my perspective. And they are adaptations. Mostly people are just doing the best with, and often not having a great set of tools having been given to them by life and experience or parents or whatever it is. But it's interesting, sort of. I mean, when you said we, let's just deconstruct that. I'm assuming you mean we, meaning you and I in this conversation.
Yes, as colleagues.
We there, I think, as well, isn't there? Which is about we, those people who've been lucky enough to be taught how to deal with stuff.
Yeah.
Is that also part of the
Yes, absolutely. And I think in that sense, we were, as I said, that we have a resource base, we have a skill set as part of our training. And maybe I don't know, I could be speaking out of turn. I know I can ask for help. And that was a learned skill.
Yeah.
So maybe not everybody has the privilege of that training. Or
no, the research that is coming out now that is looking at it. I mean, I'm a bit hesitant about saying some of the research that's happening. It's ongoing in a sense, but there's because we're still in it. I mean, we're just in another phase of pandemic, and it's going to be going on for a couple of years yet, at least. So as we move from pandemic to endemic is the sort of biological. So this coronavirus becomes something our body can cope with. But that'll take a few years. And then we've got these brilliant vaccines that are facilitating that process. So that fewer of us need to die horribly from it, which is I'm really grateful for. But so it's going to be going on for a while. But I think coming back to this point about the sort of skill set that maybe we've been taught as professionals, but also I think beyond that, broader than that, there are people who get taught a skill set, and the research that's coming out is showing that some people actually thrive during this time, and it tends to be those people, and this is true of things like drinking, for example, it tends to be those people that have already understood that there were issues in their life that they had to manage anyway, and then when the pandemic hit, because of that skill set that they developed around management of whatever those issues were, they really went to town on managing, and actually began to thrive. Does that feel a bit like what was happening to you, do you think?
Well, I think there was an element of that. As I said, it was a deep dive. And this is going to sound, I hope it's not glib. It certainly didn't feel glib. The weather made all the difference.
Oh, no, yeah.
I felt that last year, everything felt, that it was quiet. It was sunny.
Yeah.
I saw things differently. I didn't consciously go into any mindfulness practice, but it did just quiet. Everything went slow, much slower. Yeah. So I think there was a more meditative space, certainly for me. And I had no option. I could die, as you said, I think it could have been an abyss, but for whatever reason, that didn't happen. I think having my work helped, maybe it doesn't sound selfish, but it was a lifesaver. And having my son at home and knowing that we had to get through this as well as we could together was really useful. And I also have a border collie, and he needed walking. So I didn't whimsically have to get an emotional support dog. He was just there, just needing his exercise. So there was a part of being able to integrate a different way of living, him into a different way of living. And I don't particularly want to go back to how it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, I think you sort of identify with a lot of the statements that you're making. Like the weather really helped, and it was, really good weather summer last year. This summer has been awful, and it's felt worse. Or, inevitably, that's what happened. I think that's the truth when we feel confined. I remember very early on in the lockdown, that sense of quietness and how welcome that was to me. I'm a bit of an introvert, though, I have to say. So I didn't miss any of the large social gatherings because they were always a bit of a pain in the arse for me. I'm a bit of a, I think of myself as antisocial, but probably I have a bit of social phobia or social anxiety, or quite a lot of it. But so having fewer sort of social obligations actually helped me quite a lot.
Yeah.
So that wasn't true of the second lockdown, though, the one in Christmas. That was tough.
That was very tough, I think. And of course, it was all reactive.
Yeah.
That when people were out Christmas shopping, being told that Christmas wasn't going to happen, was, I think rather impactful in a different way.
Yes.
People were going to see their loved ones, which was the big gift. That was what we thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a real challenge, just seeing our family members.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I know you're trying to be humble and not toot your own horn and stuff like that, and I get it. But also, I think I will push a little bit, because I think there's an important message about we can learn a set of skills that can help us manage difficult life circumstances more effectively. And you use that set of skills, and sort of there are environmental factors such as good weather, having other people around, so that's your resilience factors. But nevertheless, you consciously used things to help you. And what sort of things, if you can think about it now, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but what sort of things do you think you did consciously use, sort of tools and resources?
In terms of managing
psychological stuff that you like, for example, because I've sort of had chronic anxiety and depression at various points in my life. I've learned various things like reframing and sort of reality testing and thought, sort of cognitive restructuring and behavioral various things like that, which I do. I mean, I suggest to patients that, but I absolutely do for myself because they work. I mean, what sort of things were on your sort of list, if you like, of stuff that you're doing?
And again, but brilliant. I had to learn. I felt so powerless and so lost. I needed to understand certain things that had gone on. So it was an opportunity to learn. And I love my books, and I've got lots of books, but there's bits of them written. I'm probably a really lazy learner. And so I watched a lot online, and there's some brilliant lectures. There's some brilliant instruction, and things became clear to me, and that was empowering. And so learning meant I was able to recognize my own patterns, perhaps patterns in others. And so suddenly it was not personal. It wasn't that I was less than or anybody is less than. And the area I felt most proud, and I do feel proud of myself, it was shame. I was able to choose a shame-free life.
Great. Which is a real challenge when relationships end and things like that. And because it sort of we invest so much culturally in these things. These sort of,
and long before that, systemic. So I know Brené Brown's done a lot on shame and vulnerability, but there is so much more. I know that I get quite excited about this, but it's an option. Until last year, I didn't realize it was an option and didn't understand that we just give shame back to those who put it into us. And I think that's, if I can do it, anybody can. And I'm not being simplistic or flippant. It's a conscious decision, and have to understand that we all deserve, shame. A shame-free life is a birthright.
Yeah. I'm going to work on the assumption that you're a deeply respectful person. I know that you are, and I think anybody who's listening in needs to work on that assumption. If they're not, they have a problem. So I don't think you need to sort of caveat with "I'm not being flippant" or anything like that. It's sort of, I worked on a forensic ward many years. One of the patients who had learning disabilities and was also in the forensic service managed to die from eating one of the cake decorations. Somebody had a birthday party, and then this memo came round from the trust saying in future all cake decorations had to be edible. And we all just fell about laughing, not because we're unpleasant people, because that's what you do. You have to have a relationship to life which is not crushing. And comedy and humor and these things are very, very important part of human experience. I mean, I think there's, because of the subject matter we're dealing with, which is about shame and abuse and narcissism and control and fear and all those things, it's very difficult, I think, for somebody who's a victim of that stuff to ever imagine that it's anything less than deadly serious. But I'd like to say it can become quite humorous and quite good fun. Life can do that, and it's okay. And there's no sense in which, I don't think, when we have humor and lightness around these things, there's no sense in which we're trying to suggest to somebody else that what their experience isn't the full measure of darkness. It is. But the full measure of darkness can also be balanced by the full measure of lightness. You know? So I think that's okay. So it sounds like actually this pandemic has been quite transformative experience for you. Is that a reasonable thing to say? Yeah,
no, I am in every way. I think it was an opportunity that we were given, and none of us asked for it. But I think that's sometimes how life is.
Yeah,
we don't ask for our life to be turned upside down. We don't ask for trauma and tragedy. We don't ask for the dark side. But then it's, what do we do with it? And it shines some light on it. And I think that's certainly what I tried to do.
So, and it's this, am I right in saying that this is probably one of the first times that you'd actually really consciously made that decision? No, I'm going to deal with it in this way, rather than sort of see it as the meaning being my life is awful, as opposed to I can do something.
Yeah, I purpose and meaning. So there was also a part of my reading was Eckhart Tolle, and the idea of the power of now. And I didn't really know how I'd feel about it. Several attempts at the power of now. But last year, again, it was really helpful, because I then began to understand that that's all that matters. That's today, we don't get today again.
Yeah. Can you say more about that? Sort of like the journey into discovering that, how it's been useful for you, and maybe how you apply it as well.
Well, I think I was always planning. Right. Always planning. I was great at I wouldn't say spreadsheets or too many diary entries, but I liked to know exactly where I was going to be a year from now. And I forgot the joy of today.
Yeah.
So last year, again, I had no tomorrow, because we were all just going day to day. We didn't know what announcements would come. So I had my son at home. I was in touch with my other son. I had the dog. do you know, and it was great. It didn't get better than that.
Yeah.
And I somehow learned to appreciate that. And then I do believe that today is the day that matters, and how we interact with each other, how we treat ourselves matters today.
Yeah.
So if we choose to pick up today, if we choose to under or overeat today, if we choose to stay in a relationship that's unhealthy, or to listen to verbiage that's less than dignified, then we're shortchanging ourselves today. So that's how I was able to bring the philosophy of now in.
That's great. I mean, that moves away from all or nothing thinking, which is disastrous, isn't it? So, like, if something goes wrong today, it's just today. Tomorrow's another day. There's a reset.
Mm-hmm.
That type of thing is sort of much healthier way of dealing with life. There's something, I think, something about the extraordinary event of the pandemic that gave us permission in some ways, or certainly gave me permission to just find that space where I was good enough, not achieving, but just good enough, that there were certain simple things in the day that I needed to achieve. And if I achieved these, it was fine. You know, everything else was more complicated. What were those for you, do you think? What were the things that you went, well, these are the things that are important, and this rest of the stuff, we'll just see how that goes?
I probably sometimes getting through the day. That was a yay. That's another one. Managed it again.
Yeah.
I take that. Yay. So I took that, and I didn't underestimate how important that was.
Yeah.
You know, because I think that's, and it isn't. I never thought I would be like that because I was such a planner, and I would, you know, in my business or in my career, I would.
Another key word involved there: planner, perfectionist.
Perfectionist, yeah, that's me. But that's it. Letting go of that, and this being good enough, as you said, because in fact we worked quite. We contacted each other quite a lot last year, and you were instrumental in affirming me and me thinking, you know, this is where I need to be going. I need to be cracking on with my practice, and I need to be. This is what has preceded this. Everything that's preceded has led up to this work I need to be doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have said it to you before, but I am grateful for that still quiet encouragement. So you're good enough for me was exceptional. You know, and I think that sometimes we don't say those things to those.
I have these great memories from my training of I started to hero worship this guy called Winnicott, which I don't know. He was sort of, you know, an extraordinary writer and communicator around psychoanalytic ideas, and particularly around things like being a good enough parent. And you didn't have to get it all right. You just had to do certain basic things and do them enough, and then trust that Mother Nature had sorted all the rest of it out, which is the truth. You know, and Mother Nature has sorted the rest of it out. And actually, there's very little we really need to do often. And small is better, generally. It was always a big relief reading his work. I mean, I think I've heard he was a bit of an idiot. His first wife doesn't have very many good things to say about him.
Yeah.
So, but certainly his ideas were, I think, revolutionary in terms of, I suppose, what we would now call compassion. Yeah. Teaching people to be compassionate with themselves, and therefore then being able to be compassionate with others.
Well, I think that without being compassionate with self, you can't really be compassionate with others. That's just my idea. I could be wrong. I mean, we can debate this till the cows come home. I think it's really important that, you know, it comes from a place of authenticity.
I mean, I totally agree. I think attachment theory has demonstrated that beyond doubt. If you can internalize a sense of love, compassion, attachment, stability, these things, and they are internalized experiences, then you can give them. Yeah. It's just like this. Absolutely. Simple science now. I don't think there's any argument about it.
And you have to be that place where you feel you're worthy. And if that's not what was put into you, I'm not talking you, me, anybody, us, and one. If that's not good, it takes a journey. It can be a difficult journey to get to the place where you know you're worthy. And then once you know you're worthy, every relationship will respect that. You will insist on respect in a relationship, whether that be your boss, your parent, your teacher, your colleague, your partner, your children. Knowing that you have intrinsic value that is unshakable, I think is part of what we do as therapists to remind people, or to perhaps help them discover that.
I mean, it's quite extraordinary to think that it took a pandemic for you to figure out that you are intrinsically worthy.
No, I'm a slow learner. I'm a slow learner. Give me.
It's great, isn't it? It's sort of something on a global scale had to happen before you went. But that is the way it happens, particularly for people who may have experienced trauma and abuse. I mean, that is the way it happens. It's sort of. I remember I did a lot of work with torture victims way back when, and we sort of, as therapists, were at a loss. I mean, you know, there's a limit to what we know how to work with, and so we'd work with the victims and sort of looking at this meaning and purpose and the potential for transformation. Always think of transformation, and sort of, and we'd be encouraging them to go find where that transformation is, because it certainly, I didn't have it to give to somebody, you know. It wasn't like I could just go, oh, here's a bit of transformation, this will sort you out. Whoa, now that's it, right, we're done. It never really works like that. So it was more about sort of supporting and encouraging people. I remember one patient came back and something had changed, and so and then the work was making more progress. Trauma and stuff like that. And it was just simply something that they'd never experienced coming from their country of origin. It was the first bluebell wood. The first bluebells of the year are always magical. If you listen to this, haven't done it yet, go find it. You know, it'll be next spring now, so you'll have to wait. But a British woods full of bluebells is extraordinary, and this person done that by accident, and something had changed inside them, and I don't really know what it was, but it certainly there'd been enough change that then the stuff we were doing made sense. And it's being ready to see things, and I think that's my work is, and this is what we've talked about. Sometimes when I have a client or something it's never what it seems. My work is detective work. We work together, my clients and I. Nothing is as it seems, and it has to be done very gently. So a bit like the bluebells, you know, they may not be able to see the bluebells. They're not, so much else is clouding their judgment. And I think that's certainly been, so I'm learning, I'm educated with each conversation I have with my clients about how these processes work. These, it's certainly with narcissistic abusive patterns of behavior, and give it, like you said, walking with our clients and educating them, informing them, and showing them patterns of behavior that then they start to recognize and come back. Okay, so let's begin to talk about the project and the recovery from narcissistic abuse. So I think we probably need to define what narcissism is to some extent. I think it's time to do that, and why I want to take a bit of time to get to know you and allow you to sort of show yourself is because I think my experience is, and I don't know what yours is, but my experience is that people who've experienced narcissistic abuse can find it very difficult to engage with people who aren't able to be human and vulnerable and open and messy, and will tend to go and find professionals who sort of represent the abuser and are are not very effective and helpful in that sense. Not that the professional is an abuser, but the same dynamics get played out. They're just sort of, and that's why I brought up the issue of torture victims, because there's similar dynamics going on.
Oh, but we have talked about this, and I think this is why tonight is such a gift of an opportunity to open the conversation, because I think in the therapeutic community, or the recognition of narcissistic abuse is essentially in its infancy, and it is a really difficult topic. It's so
because the patient presents as something be labeled by words such as borderline, as etc., you know, mother's ruined Jim, all that sort of stuff, hysterical, and so but before we get into that, and also, I mean, I'm also going to add maybe another complication. One of the things is that, like, we're beginning to understand, for example, in the work with sex addicts and their partners, that the partners are traumatized, and begin to understand in terms of the work with addicts and generally in their partners, that their partners and children are traumatized by the experiences of being with this person. And so trauma is featuring, and certainly that's going to be in this conversation as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
having a trauma-informed approach, because what trauma does neurologically and interpersonally is make somebody look like a set of symptoms that could be understood in many different ways.
Thank you for the insight and the introduction on that, because it is complex post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder are all in this mix. So first tell me,
what do you mean clinically, professionally, and in any sense, what is narcissistic abuse? Is it the same as, you know, Silence of the Lambs? This guy was locked up eating people. What is narcissism? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a pattern of behavior, like so many types of abuse. It's a series of it's sometimes seemingly innocuous behaviors that actually destroy the self. So we've talked about gaslighting, where somebody's reality might be questioned. So it would be along the lines of, I gave you that money, and they said, no, you didn't. And so I remembered that, no, you didn't. Are you going mad? And that's how, so drip, the control. So it might not be control in the sense of you be there at 2 o'clock. It will be, are you not wearing that, are you? Or why would you have your hair up when, you know, I prefer it, it looks better down, but you do what you want. And it's like, oh, okay, it's whatever. Then it would be, you're not going out again to see your friends. Why would you see your friends? I thought we were going to have a takeaway and watch telly. So they isolate the individual. Triangulation is another form of emotional abuse, where they might mention a previous partner as being better in some respect. Very simply, there's 3 phases. So the idealizing phase, so the narcissistic partner will idealize an individual, and they are the best, and they're showered with presents, and then they'll get them to a place where they trust and they have some kind of commitment, and then the devaluing will start, which was, you've put on a few pounds, or, you know, could you wear a different outfit? Could you be taller? Could you be shorter? Could you be fatter? Could you be thin? You know, and then discarding. Now, generally speaking, in a partnership, the person will be replaced. I've yet to know with my client work where they haven't been replaced. So, and it might be a previous partner that you met that person when they were with somebody else. So these patterns of the narcissist
model,
and we can never deal with the narcissist. I'd never do. I can't. We're not. I'm way above my pay grade. It's what's left. It's what's left of the person. But of course, it's not just with partners. It can be colleagues, or it can be parents, or it can be children. So what we do know is that the likelihood is, if you have early narcissistic experiences, abusive experiences, you're more likely to not be intimidated or even find attractive a narcissistic partner. But that's perhaps another conversation. But essentially, the madness, the illness, comes from doubting the reality. It can lead to behaviors such as drinking, drugs, eating, under or over, disordered eating, acting out. And I think one of the most interesting ones is projective identification, where the abuser provokes to such an extent that the survivor acts out in a way they would never have imagined themselves, kicking and screaming and being really quite abusive themselves. And then the abuser will stand back and say, look what I have to put up with. We need therapy for them. They need sectioning. They need institutionalizing. The fault is with that. And I think it's Vaknin. Some Vaknin calls it narcissism by proxy. Projective identity, the survivor does the behaviors. And then, of course, everybody's been groomed. And that's what we spoke about this morning.
Yeah.
So is that too much? I think that's
an
awful lot going on.
I think it's very clear, and people need to understand that there is a clarity about this stuff. And sort of, so I'm just going to reflect back some of the things that I heard that seem to me quite important issues. One is that it's not possible to treat the narcissist.
Well, in my work, I can only speak about how I work, and I don't, but it depends. There's different types of narcissism. So there's malignant, there's covert, there's somatic, there's psychopathy. So there's the whole personality disorder. I am not anywhere near knowledgeable enough to discuss that. I know what I'm quite confident about these patterns of behaviors that I see in clients as being indicative of narcissistic abuse, and possibly yet to be in the DSM, narcissistic abuse syndrome. But we also have the coercive control guidelines now, and you often see the two being of, there's a parallel.
Yeah, I mean, because I come from a forensic background, I've worked a lot with PD and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it's pretty much impossible to treat narcissism, mostly because the narcissist doesn't realise they've got a problem.
Yeah.
And if somebody doesn't think they've got a problem, you're pissing in the wind. Wasting your time.
Beautifully put, Noel, beautifully put. And it's never their fault. And they're very good at victims.
Yeah. It's the same with predatory paedophilia or predatory rape. It's always the victim wanted it. And I've sat with sex offenders who were absolutely convinced that their 5-year-old child they abused sort of seduced them, the perpetrator. So like when you're working with that level of psychological disorder, to all intents and purposes, it's untreatable. And I say that because in the circumstances we find ourselves, and the circumstances anybody listening to this in this conversation are likely to find themselves, trying to treat the narcissist is a waste of time, counterproductive, and probably dangerous.
It can be, and that's why I work very carefully. We talked about safeguarding this morning before our discussion this evening, because I have concerns about disclosure, and the examples I give with clients' permission, I have, we're sure that there's not going to be repercussions, but the degree.
Just so people understand this.
Yeah.
So somebody who's in the victim of a narcissistic predator can't just suddenly come out and say, I'm the victim of a narcissistic predator, even if they knew that, even if they could have the wherewithal, let's say they went and did some secret sort of psychotherapy that they kept away from the abuse department, They get some of these amazing insights, and then they go, you're a narcissist, I'm a victim of that, I've got this syndrome. But if they're involved with the narcissist, if they're in the same house as them, you can't say that because it's too dangerous. It's literally too dangerous. I'm not talking it might be upsetting. I'm talking lives could be at risk.
Well, it can be on several different levels. They can be violent.
Yeah.
There can be violence. It doesn't need to be physical violence. It can be that living in fear is so frightening, not eating or sleeping. So it's can affect health that way. And I call it the perfect murder, because people just feel life is pointless.
Yeah.
And they end up with self-destructive behaviors or other behaviors that maybe they, I do have permission. Clients have talked about having allergies, and then they will suddenly find themselves with the object, the food they're allergic to, in their food. And so it's very hard to prove that this person's in danger, because it was like the family or a friend or even the therapist may say, oh, I'm sure they wouldn't do that. They might not be very nice sometimes, but they wouldn't do that. So that's what the Grace Project is about, is bearing witness when you think nobody understands. Where the website, I lead with a small team. We get it. It's very hard to be heard, because the narcissist is plausible, very charming, usually has everybody else groomed. It's because they're in for the long haul. They play the long game. They will have been grooming people for years.
Mm-hmm.
And they lie. And you have, if without evidence, it's, well, I got food poisoning, and it's, well, and I think he wouldn't do that, or she wouldn't do that. Yeah. And statistically, it's likely men, but it can be women.
And people don't understand grooming, I think, and what it means. But grooming means, for me, and you tell me if I'm being too simplistic about this, grooming is where you make the victim of something feel responsible for what's happening to them when they're not. Okay, and the way I understand it is like this. If say any one of us is walking down the street and we get mugged, one of the first things we do afterwards, if we're not, in hospital stuff, let's just say we have our phone snatched out of it, we immediately start to go, that was stupid of me to carry the phone. That was dumb. Why did I walk down that street? And we do this sort of self-blame. And if people can times that by 1,000 and on a daily basis, that's what it's like to be groomed by an abuser, by a narcissistic abuser. And that as well as this sort of rocking of the reality, people don't know, gaslighting comes from a term from a play that was written in the 50s about a guy who turned his wife mad by messing with the lights. There happened to be gaslights in those days. And he would make them flicker, and she would go, the lights flickering. He'd go, no, they're not. No, what are you talking about? There's something wrong with you. But they were flickering. The lights were flickering, and he was doing it. And that's where the term comes from. And it's sort of, messing with people's sense of reality like that, and then making them feel responsible. Now, again, it's a well-known phenomenon in, say, domestic abuse, that's what the abuser does, is that they make the victim feel, and victims will tell you this, is, if only I hadn't made him, it's generally him, if only I hadn't made him do that, then he wouldn't have done that. It was really, but actually, rather than holding a boundary or a bottom line, it's never okay to hit me under any circumstances, because it's not, etc., etc. It's those are the types, without the violence, and I think it's really important to understand that this grooming and abuse happens often without violence, because I think when violence happens, it's like, in a sense, it's easy to point to it and the police get involved and all that sort of stuff. They hit me. But without it, it can still be just as damaging if you're living in fear and walking on eggshells.
Yeah. You just can't see the wounds. But very often there's things like pushing.
Yes.
So, or accidentally on the stairs. And it's like, did that really happen? So it can be feel violence from my survivors, from my clients. but then they're doubting themselves, and that's actually the gaslighting, when I speak of it, is actually doubting their own sense of what's really going on. And it was only a push, because he will or she will say, and as I said, it can be she and it could be a parent, I never hit them, which is true. And that's the other thing about the language. I encourage my clients to just try yes or no answers. So if they're doubting things, because the language of an abuser will be vague.
Yes.
So did you put that check in? It could be, I believe so. Well, if a narcissist believes, then it's real, but it's a yes or no answer.
Yeah.
Or were you with whoever from work on Friday? Yes or no? It might be, they could say something like, if I told you I was. It's a yes or no answer.
Yeah.
And if they say, where did that money, has money gone out of our account? And it could be, oh, maybe, don't worry about it. So the language is really vague and interesting.
Yeah.
These are yes or no answers.
Absolutely. And so this is all good. I mean, I think it's very clear to me what we're describing something that is very toxic, manipulative. The end game is to destroy the other person and get rid of them, however that, and then begin the cycle again with somebody else. It sounds very cold saying it this way, but I think it's really important people understand that they become an object for the narcissistic abuse.
Yes, it's called supply. Yeah. And generally speaking,
isn't that really,
isn't it?
Horrifying words.
It is.
But it nails it. It really nails it. Yeah.
And they tend not, and these people tend not to ever let the person go. So the child may go, leave home essentially, or the partner may split, or the person may leave the company, but there will be what's called hoovering or breadcrumbing or baiting, so that they can't ever leave, because narcissists can't leave because of what you said earlier about attachment.
Yeah.
So it's
also, people should understand narcissism is as a psychological defense. It's known as the Humpty Dumpty defense. Yeah. So like if we look at Donald Trump, for example, he can't admit being wrong because his defense would shatter. Mm-hmm. That's his perception of it.
Yes.
It's not adaptable and flexible, and therefore he can't be wrong. And it's the same with the narcissist. That's why they can't give up. They have to always rule and dominate. And it's also why it's probably not worth getting into a fight with them about any of these things.
Yeah.
Get out, dodge, folks. Just get out, dodge, because
that's why education is so important. Is because once you recognize the pattern, you know what you've got, and then you don't need to work at it.
Yeah.
Then you don't need to. So in this situation where they can't leave the partner or they can't leave the company, if you've got a narcissistic boss, you can't leave for economic reasons. Yeah. You can do something called soul distance. And that's what with my side, it's that, well, they know what's going to come. They know how to deal with it. Yeah. They know how to set boundaries. They just don't give of themselves so that there's more of themselves.
Yeah. And then be exploited. All the other stuff around looking after themselves, and they might have to do that in secret. So if it's an intimate partner, you may have to develop friendships in secret and all of that sort of stuff, and reinvest. Yes.
Yes. I think there's a lot to be said and for understanding what's gone on. I said this earlier. Yeah. If you understand what you're going through, you can access resources. And the domestic helpline or Safe Lives, there are fora that are very, very quick to offer online or telephone support.
And they understand the processes as well. I mean, they're going to places in which when you get hold of them, they'll go, oh yeah, right, no, absolutely understand it. Yeah. Like most domestic abuse charities, they have special buttons on their website, which get rid of the website immediately, and also clear your history.
That's right.
History, so that you don't have to worry about those things, and et cetera, et cetera. So tell me, and then you have this project. Tell me what it's called.
Yes. So the the Grace Project was launched in May, very tentatively, but it's a platform for education and to raise awareness around narcissistic abuse and give hope to survivors. And so I've written a few posts. I hope to get some workshops. They've been scuppered again by the pandemic, but we'll get that going. And it's also, there's a few resources. Everything's free. The point is, apart from the workshop, eventually I need some kind of recompense for it. But the idea is that people who can't access therapy because therapy is expensive, and also they can't leave the home for whatever reason, or it's difficult to, they can be educating themselves in the meantime.
Yeah.
So it's a tool for empowerment and for bearing witness, because men, women, and children who are experiencing narcissistic abuse are not imagining it. So we bear witness. The whole point is that they are, if they have that feeling, and there's a very specific feeling with narcissistic abuse, that the survivor doesn't know what they're feeling, but they know it's wrong, immorally, fundamentally, spiritually, psychologically, it's wrong, but they don't quite know what it is.
Yeah.
So there's information there that can just begin the process.
And you said this website, what's the URL for the website?
So it's www.thegraceproject, or one word, .co.uk.
Okay, the Grace Project. We'll put that out. So
thank you. I appreciate that. And the grace we refer to is the state we want to get to, because if we think we're going mad, if we do become the abuser because of projective identification, then we think less of ourselves and stay in the relationship because we deserve no better.
Yeah.
So that's what I said. Dignity and respect is a birthright. And there are but one or two people who've worked with me on this. They know who they are, and we wouldn't have launched it without them. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for
Can
pushing
you
me.
or not? I don't know.
Not at that. No, this is no. We've got a little team identified anonymously, but it really. I think this is the beginning. No, so I appreciate our opportunity to have the conversation tonight, because I think it's the dark side, and we need to be shining light on it.
I remember when you told me about it, I just said, "Yeah, back time." Really, so I'm glad somebody's doing it.
I have a fan. We have.
World domination next.
No, I think
not today. Next week is fine. Sort of. We've still got a bit of time left, but I'm pushing it on because I want to get to another part of the conversation you and I have had, which is a sort of relatively disastrous professional response to people who are victims of this abuse, and how professional services can collude and enable. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think the more we cover the types of experiences people get, if they're listening to this, they can get identification and go, right, okay, it isn't just me. This is really happening. So what types of things, obviously it doesn't happen when you meet with people, but what types of experiences do the victims of narcissistic abuse have when they go into therapy sessions or couples counselling, or get sent by a parent to a therapist? That's the one I get all the time, is there's something wrong with little Johnny. It's like, is it? Yeah. I literally had a family the other day, because my company won't do that. We will only work systemically. And so if anybody under 18 is referred in by parents, we demand that the parents work with us, unless the child says absolutely not, they're awful, I don't want to go anywhere near them. And I literally had a family just the other day. We did our first family session, and suddenly one of the parents decided this was no good anymore, and that was it, and they weren't even going to pay the bill, and all that.
And there you had it.
It's
told you everything you needed to know.
It's like whatever. So what sort of things, have your clients telling you happens when mummy sends them off, or daddy sends them off to therapy, or hubby drags them into couple counselling?
Well, it's very hard, because it tends to need to be fairly long term, but they might talk about their depression or their drinking or their anxiety, which all of which are real. These are, but we don't necessarily
to abuse.
Reactive. So then they may talk about just something that their partner did and thought was okay, and they just mention it just as in passing.
Yeah.
So we rewind, and it could be, "Oh, took my phone away when we had an argument and left me alone on a holiday resort."
It wasn't so much thinking about that, because I think when we challenge the reality, the abused reality, sort of help people restructure, I think that's fairly well understood. Or it is in this context. I think that's
right. Okay.
I'm talking more about the experience when people go and see a therapist doesn't know what they're doing. There's quite a lot of that there when it comes
to yes.
So the types of things I experience where narcissistic behaviours are happening are like I said. A parent will refer a child in. The child is the scapegoat, but actually, when you start looking at what's going on, that the response to pressures in the family. But it also happens in couples therapy, I think.
For sure. You've been with a couple and she's the problem or he's the problem.
Yeah.
And there a lot of it's plausible. You see, very often, and this is what it's really interesting about couples work, is because they can for a narcissist, fooling the therapist is a blood sport.
Yes, that's right.
So they're way ahead.
That's what I needed you to hear.
That's So what the partner will do is, they're going probably with the mea culpas and how they're sorry and they've done some bad things, but life's been hard. And then the survivor or the other partner is they're thinking, well, they've just taken the wind out of my sail.
Yeah.
And then it becomes really difficult because the therapist might be saying, well, he seems to be saying he's committed to you or she's committed to you, and that the money was taken for the child's school fund, and it's like, so the survivor, the abusee, is not being heard because possibly the abuser has done a very good job on disguising the degree of destruction in them.
And also, I think often the abuser will present themselves as wanting to help the other party. Well, that's why we're here, because we've got problems and we need to sort it out.
It's called care trolling. So what they will say, I've been worried about him or her for so long, and I really don't. I lose sleep over him, and he does this, and I love him so much. And in the meantime, they've got this secret life, which never presents itself in the therapy until one day maybe the partner brings a receipt and says, what's this hotel for?
Yeah. So one of the things I do, and I don't know whether you would recommend this, but to try and figure that stuff out is that I do subsystem work. So if I'm doing couple work, I will always insist that part of the process is we're going to have one-to-ones to look at sort of individualized spaces. Families, we do subsets and things like that. I never accept the story as presented.
Absolutely. Well, it's not for me to. I mean, we work differently. We work how it's just something that seems to be becoming more recognized in this particular work. Forensics.
Yeah.
The difference in narcissistic abuse is that the word of the narcissistic abuser and the deeds do not match.
Yeah.
So when I have a client, when I have with me, I will say, what are you looking at? What makes you think that? And they will say, well, I saw a receipt, or money's going missing from the account. So unfortunately, it's not even psychotherapy. It's actually detective work sometimes. And that is really important. And I think colleagues in this particular kind of agree, unfortunately, it is, well, fortunately, that is a counterbalance to the perceived insanity.
Yes.
You're imagining it. Actually, you're not. £5,000 has gone missing.
Because what's happening is the skilled abuser has constructed a story with evidence.
That's right.
Very plausible. Unfortunately, we do need to finish there. Because
thank you. Thank you again.
Bye bye. I know you're anxious today, but it's like
yes, because I'm being the perfectionist. I would get it right, but I really, more than anything, I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity for us to discuss, and a platform for
well, we're going to
survivors.
come back to it. I mean, I think it's a really important subject, and we need to look at sort of maybe some more of the clinical applications as well. But this evening, I wanted it to be available as a resource for people who might identify. The Grace Project, or the Margaret's project, is one of the places that you can go to.
Yeah.
There are other things such as domestic abuse organizations, and we'll put a list of those up with Margaret's help, and sort of as the podcast goes out, we'll put a list of links. We do have to finish there because I'll get told off by men's radio station, women's radio station if I go over or under an hour. I have to be absolutely spot on 1 hour. Margaret, it's been lovely to have you on. Gonna finish there, folks. Lovely, thanks for joining us. See you all next week. I have no idea who's on, but we're living in today, as Margaret has suggested. So why should I know what's going on next week? It's unhealthy to think that far ahead, as opposed to just incompetence on my part. So I'm going to go with that. Bye-bye, folks. You stay there, Margaret. Bye-bye, folks. See you.